The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Every executive manager and shareholder sat frozen as the tall glass doors swung open. The woman who stepped inside didn't belong to the world they remembered. Not anymore. She wasn't the quiet, eager employee they once dismissed without a second thought. No, this woman radiated power, precision, revenge. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded more like a countdown than footsteps. She wore a tailored black suit, sharp as a blade, her hair pulled back in a sleek style that revealed nothing but confidence. In her hand, a single folder slim but heavy with purpose. Jason Miller felt his throat tighten the moment their eyes met. His smirk, the one he always wore. Like a badge of arrogance, faltered. His fingers twitched as if reaching for control he no longer had. Emily Carter smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips. As of today, she began, her voice steady and clear, slicing through the tension like a knife through silk. I own this company. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Whispers followed, but Emily didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed locked on Jason, watching the color drain from his face. I see some familiar faces, she continued, slowly pacing toward the head of the table. Faces that once decided I wasn't worth saving. Jason finally found his voice, though it cracked with disbelief. This is a joke, right? You're not even supposed to be here. Emily placed the folder on the table with deliberate care. She opened it, revealing documents stamped and signed, proof of majority ownership. The Nexora Corp logo gleamed on every page, but it was her name beneath it all. No. Jason. The joke, she leaned in slightly. Her eyes narrowing, was thinking. I wouldn't survive. The room fell deathly quiet again, the weight of her words pressing on every person present, the same people who had watched her fall years ago, the same ones who turned their backs when Jason had orchestrated her downfall. But before anyone could speak, before the questions or excuses could pour out, Emily's mind drifted just for a moment back to where it all began, back to the day they left her for dead. 3 years earlier, rain lashed against the windows of Nexora Corp as Emily sat alone in the conference room, staring at the termination letter in her trembling hands. The words blurred through her tears, but the message was clear enough. You're done. The door creaked open behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Jason. His cologne gave him away, the same expensive scent she once found comforting, now made her stomach churn. I told you not to take it personally. Jason's voice was cold, casual, like they hadn't shared years together, like he hadn't just stabbed her in the back to save himself. Emily stood up slowly, the letter crumpling in her fist. You lied. You told them it was my fault. Jason shrugged, adjusting his cufflinks with infuriating calm. It was either you or me, Em. And let's be honest, you were always the expendable one. Her heart shattered at the finality in his tone. There was no remorse, no hesitation, just ambition, dressed in betrayal. As she pushed past him, Jason called after her one last time. Here's some advice. Don't bother trying to clear your name. No one cares. You're finished. Hours later, as Emily walked home under the stormy sky, her phone buzzed relentlessly, headlines, social media posts, whispers spreading like wildfire. Disgraced employee faces, legal action after Nexora scandal. Her name was everywhere, but not for the reasons she once dreamed of. And then came the screech of tires, the blinding headlights, the cold pavement beneath her as everything faded to black. When she woke up in a hospital bed days later, battered and broken, there were no visitors, no friends, no family. Just the echo of Jason's words and the crushing realization she had been erased. But that night, as she stared at the ceiling, something inside her hardened. They thought they had buried her. They thought she would disappear, forgotten like yesterday's news. They were wrong. Present day. Emily snapped back to the boardroom, watching as Jason fumbled through the documents in front of him, his hands shaking. This isn't possible, he muttered. Panic creeping into his voice. You can't just come back, and I didn't come back. Jason. Emily interrupted, her voice laced with quiet triumph. I rose. She straightened, turning her attention to the rest of the room. I suggest you all get comfortable with the new reality. Nexora belongs to me now, and trust me. I have a long memory. The executives exchanged nervous glances, knowing this was no longer the company they once controlled. It was Emily's domain now, and she was just getting started. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and something colder abandonment. Emily stared at the IV drip beside her bed, its steady rhythm reminding her she was still alive, even if every part of her wished she could deny it. Bandages wrapped around her ribs, a deep gash traced her forehead, and her leg was immobilized in a cast, but none of that compared to the hollow ache in her chest. Days had passed since the accident. At least that's what the nurses said. Emily had stopped counting. What was the point when no one walked through that door? Not Jason. Not a single so-called friend from Nixora. Her phone, when they finally handed it back, was a graveyard of missed calls from unknown numbers, likely reporters. But from anyone who mattered, silence. She scrolled through social media, watching her own name trend for all the wrong reasons. The headlines were merciless. Ex-Nexora employee dodges charges. After mysterious accident, from rising star to cautionary tale. The fall of Emily Carter. Each article twisted the knife deeper. The world had already written her off, sealing her fate with digital ink. When a nurse gently suggested it was time to think about discharge plans, Emily let out a bitter laugh. Discharged to where her apartment was gone, eviction notices didn't wait for hospital recoveries. Her bank account was drained, courtesy of legal fees she couldn't even fight anymore. That night, as rain tapped against the window pane, Emily sat up as much as her broken body would allow. She found a notepad the hospital had left on the side table, meant for jotting down questions for doctors, maybe a grocery list. Instead, she wrote 4 words at the top of the page. They think I'm dead. Her hand trembled, not from weakness, but from the spark that flickered inside her, a dangerous, stubborn spark. If the world believed she was finished, maybe that was exactly what she needed, to disappear, to become a ghost, but not one that faded away. A ghost that haunted every name on her mental list. Weeks turned into months. Emily moved through the shadows of the city like someone reborn, scarred but sharper, with no job, no reputation, and no safety net. Survival became her greatest skill. She found work under the table at a dingy internet cafe where the owner didn't care about her past, as long as she showed up on time, between wiping down sticky keyboards and rebooting ancient machines. Emily devoured every piece of knowledge she could about finance, corporate law, and investments. Late at night, when the cafe emptied out, she'd sit in the back corner, eyes glued to the screen, learning the game that had once destroyed her. It was during one of those nights that a stranger approached her, a man in his 60s, sharply dressed but with an air of someone who preferred watching rather than being seen. "I've noticed you," he said, pulling out the chair across from her without waiting for permission. Emily tensed instinctively, reaching for the pepper spray she kept in her bag. "I'm not here to hurt you," he added smoothly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "In fact, I believe we share a common enemy." He slid a business card across the table. "Grant Whitaker. No title, no company name, just a number." Emily frowned. "Who are you?" "Let's just say I have a habit of collecting undervalued assets," Grant replied, "and you, Miss Carter, are perhaps the most underestimated person in this city." Suspicion warred with curiosity. "Why would you care?" Grant leaned in, his voice lowering. "Because I know what Jason Miller did. I know how Nexora operates. And I know potential when I see it. You don't need saving. You need resources." Emily's heart pounded. Was this real, or just another trap? As if reading her mind, Grant smirked. "I'm not offering charity, I'm offering a partnership. You want revenge, build an empire. That's how you make them regret ever crossing you." He stood up, leaving the card behind. "When you're ready to stop surviving and start winning, call me." It took Emily 3 days to make the call. Not because she doubted him, but because she needed to look in the mirror and see someone who was ready to play a much bigger game. When Grant answered, his only words were, "Welcome to the other side." From that moment, Emily's world shifted. Grant didn't just hand her money, he handed her blueprints, connections, access to a world where power wasn't given, it was taken. Under his mentorship, Emily launched EC Holdings, a shell company designed to move silently through corporate waters. While Nexora celebrated quarterly profits and Jason climbed higher up the ladder, Emily was buying stakes in subsidiary suppliers and silent partnerships tied to Nexora's foundation. Every investment was a brick in the fortress she was building around them, one they wouldn't see until the gates slammed shut. Back in the present, Emily watched Jason from across the boardroom table. His confidence was crumbling with every passing second as reality set in. She remembered all the nights she spent cold, hungry, and forgotten nights where his betrayal echoed louder than her own heartbeat. And now, standing in the very building where they tried to erase her, Emily felt nothing but clarity. This wasn't just revenge, this was justice served cold, calculated, and absolute. And Jason hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. The beauty of revenge wasn't in the grand gestures, it was in the details no one noticed until it was far too late. Emily learned that quickly. Under Grant Whitaker's tutelage, power didn't announce itself. It whispered. It signed documents in back rooms. It wore the face of a silent partner while pulling the strings of CEOs who never thought to ask who really owned their company. 2 years after that fateful night in the internet cafe, Emily Carter no longer existed. Not in the eyes of the corporate world. What stood in her place was EC Holdings, an enigmatic investment firm that no one could quite trace yet. Everyone in the know respected and feared. It started small, a minority stake in a logistics company that Nexora relied on. Then a quiet acquisition of a tech supplier teetering on bankruptcy, one Jason Miller himself had dismissed as irrelevant during a quarterly report. Emily smiled when she read that memo. Every discarded piece Jason overlooked became another thread in her growing web. By the time Nexora's leadership noticed shifts in their ecosystem, Emily had already secured influence over key vendors, data management firms, and even the consulting agency that advised Nexora's board. They thought they were still in control, but Emily was already in the walls. She sat in meetings under different names represented by proxies and figureheads. She listened as Jason bragged about expansion strategies, oblivious to the fact that every bold move he made was being funneled straight into her trap. One rainy afternoon, as Emily reviewed a portfolio of acquisitions, Grant leaned back in his chair, watching her with a mixture of pride and caution. "You've done well," he said, tapping a pen against his glass desk. "But power attracts attention. Are you ready for them to start asking who's behind the curtain?" Emily didn't look up from the documents. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "Let them ask. By the time they figure it out, I'll be sitting in Jason's chair." Grant chuckled, but there was a glint of warning in his eyes. Revenge has a way of clouding judgment. "Emily, don't just aim to destroy him, aim to outlast him." She finally met his gaze, her expression sharper than ever. "I'm not here for a quick burn, Grant. I'm here to own the ashes." 6 months later, Nexora Corp announced a merger deal that would solidify its dominance in the tech industry. Jason Miller, now the company's COO, was the face of the campaign, smiling confidently on magazine covers, giving interviews about innovation and vision. Emily watched every broadcast, noting how Jason spoke as if he were untouchable, how he praised the silent investors backing the merger, never realizing that the largest stakeholder behind that deal was the woman he thought he'd buried. The final play began with a simple email. A notice of an emergency shareholder meeting called by EC Holdings, now holding a controlling interest after a series of rapid but discreet buyouts. Jason didn't see it coming. In fact, no one did. The morning of the meeting, Emily stood before the mirror in her penthouse suite. The reflection staring back wasn't seeking validation or revenge anymore. This was business. She fastened a minimalist silver necklace around her neck, one of the few items she had kept from her old life, a reminder of who she was and who she had become. Her phone buzzed, a message from Grant. "All set time to collect what's yours." Emily's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. When she arrived at Nexora's headquarters, no one recognized her at first. The receptionist offered a polite but dismissive glance, clearly mistaking her for a lawyer or consultant. That changed the moment she signed in, and security escorted her straight to the executive floor. As she walked through the corridors she once paced as an overlooked employee, memories threatened to surface, whispers of humiliation, fear, betrayal. But Emily had buried that version of herself long ago. Now she was the storm they never saw on the forecast. Inside the boardroom, Jason was already pacing, confusion etched across his face as he scanned the agenda. "Who the hell is EC Holdings?" he snapped at one of the junior executives. No one had an answer. When the doors opened and Emily stepped inside, the confusion turned to disbelief. Jason's jaw tightened, his bravado cracking in front of his peers. "You..." He choked out, as if saying her name would break the illusion. Emily placed a leather-bound folder on the table just like she had practiced calm controlled. She took her seat at the head of the table, his seat. "The agenda is simple," she announced, her voice steady and commanding. "Ownership transfer, leadership restructuring, effective immediately." Jason lunged forward, slamming his hands on the table. "This is a stunt. You don't belong here." Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she slid a document across to him, a detailed breakdown of the shares signed and sealed. "I belong wherever the majority shareholder decides to sit," she replied coolly. "And that's me, Jason?" The rest of the executives sat in stunned silence, realizing the gravity of what was unfolding. The woman they had once dismissed had returned not as a ghost but as their superior. Jason's face twisted in desperation. "You can't run this company. You don't have what it takes." Emily stood gathering her folder. She leaned in, her voice dropping just enough for only him to hear. I don't need to run it, she whispered. I just need to own it. With that, she turned to the room. Meeting adjourned. You'll receive further instructions by end of day. As she walked out, Jason collapsed into his chair, his world unraveling. Emily didn't look back. This wasn't the end. This was her beginning. Jason Miller didn't sleep that night. For the first time in years, his phone stayed silent. No congratulatory messages, no calls from investors eager to please him. Instead, there were emails he didn't dare open, memos marked urgent, notifications of access revocations, calendar events disappearing one by one. By morning, his keycard no longer worked. When Jason arrived at Nexora's headquarters, security greeted him, not with their usual nods, but with a polite, rehearsed line, Mr. Miller, you've been requested to wait in Conference Room B. Conference Room B, not his office, not the executive suite, a room reserved for guest outsiders. He knew then that Emily wasn't wasting time. Emily sat at the head of the table reviewing documents when Jason was escorted in. She didn't bother to stand. Power didn't rise for desperation. Jason looked disheveled, his usual pristine appearance cracked under the weight of panic. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. We need to talk. Emily glanced up, her expression unreadable. We're already doing that. He took a step forward, gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Look, whatever this is, this vendetta, it's gone far enough. You proved your point. A soft, almost amused breath escaped her lips. Jason, you think this is about proving a point? She closed the folder with a quiet thud and finally met his gaze, her eyes cold and surgical. You left me with nothing. You watched me fall and you didn't blink. Now you're asking for mercy because you've lost a title. Jason's jaw clenched. You've got the company fine, but you can't run it without me. The board trusts me. The industry trusts me. Emily stood slowly circling the table toward him. Trust, she echoed, pulling out her phone. With a tap, she projected a screen onto the wall. A slideshow began, screenshots of internal emails, recordings of Jason's backdoor deals, expense reports, hiding embezzlement, and a particularly damning video of him mocking investors during a private party. Jason's face turned ashen. I've been collecting your greatest hits for a while now, Emily said smoothly. Funny how people talk freely when they think no one's listening, or when they assume the woman they buried isn't pulling the strings. Jason lunged forward, his voice rising. You can't release that. It'll destroy me. That's the idea. Emily's tone never wavered. She walked to the window looking out over the city skyline. But I'm not just going to leak this to the press. That would be too merciful. Jason swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling. Then what do you want? Emily turned back, her gaze sharp enough to cut. I want you to feel every ounce of helplessness I felt. So, here's how this is going to work. She tossed a sealed envelope onto the table. You're going to resign. Effective immediately. Not just from Nexora, but from every board, every advisory role, every public appearance. You'll sign this non-compete clause that bars you from working in tech or finance for the next decade. Jason's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, scanning the brutal terms. This is a death sentence, he whispered. Emily stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. No, Jason. Death would have been kind. This is exile. Hours later, headlines exploded across every major news outlet. Jason Miller resigns. Amid scandal, Nexora, under new leadership, leaked footage reveals corruption at the top of Nexora Corp. Emily Carter, the woman who rose from ruin to rule. Jason watched from his apartment, curtains drawn as his